Welcome back, friends. Welcome to Memoirs of a Psychiatrist. This is our fourth episode, and in this I'm going to be talking about how we used hypnosis to solve a murder. The first murder that we used hypnosis for myself to bring back clues about a murder that took place back in 1976 when I was just a young resident in medicine. So last few times, if you remember, I was talking about the use of hypnosis. I was a resident in the hospital, and I had hypnotized a patient in ICU who was a patient of Dr. Larry Denson, who was the medical examiner for Bergen County at that time in 1976, 74 it was. And over 2 years, he had become a good friend. And he now became from a non-believer in psychiatry to an ardent believer in hypnosis and psychiatry, and had sent me a lot of patients with asthma, ulcerative colitis, various psychosomatic illnesses, all of which we discussed last time. And now the year was 1976. I was a chief resident at that time in the hospital, on my way out of the hospital because I was finishing my residency, if I remember correctly, and headed towards my child and adolescent fellowship in Einstein in the Bronx.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so at that time...
a psychiatrist in the Bronx. Wow.
Yeah, that was Einstein was in the Bronx.
Yeah.
I lived in New Jersey. I would go there every day to attend my fellowship, but I just finished in New Jersey, or I was finishing. I don't remember exactly how that happened, but murders were not that common, Lou, back in 1976. Not like they are today. Today, you look in the newspaper or TV, you see a lot of murders and killings, but at that time it was rare. This was in the summer of 1976, almost 50 years ago. And the murderer that, with the use of hypnosis, the police caught is still in jail. In fact, every so often he comes up for probation, and the county is up in arms, and they go up to the probation board and they petition the board not to let him out. But at that time, again, I was a young resident.
This is a murder case that captures our imagination, right? Because normally when there are murders involved, we think people are involved in things and they end up killing each other. When a young woman gets murdered, the community pays attention.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, especially when there's no other murders on the newspaper, and no reason for this killing. So what we know, I'll walk you through the steps as I saw them. At that time, as I said, there were only 4 stations, and TVs were black and white with rabbit ears, and NBC, CBS, PBS, and ABC were the stations that were there. Every station would every so often have a picture of this young college student. She was 20, and the story as they told it in the papers, and I think you're going to put on the website some newspaper clippings and headlines.
I have the first clip up of her, basically the announcement of her murder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that time, all we knew about, and this everybody was talking about it, because here was a 20-year-old girl that had come home from college to be with her family, and she'd gone to the mall, which was a new mall at the time, Paramus Park Mall, and had gone to drop her brother off at some sports practice, baseball or football, and then had dropped him off and had come back to the mall. And when she was supposed to pick him up or go back home, she was nowhere to be found. The car was still parked in the mall, and she was nowhere to be found. Subsequent searches by the police found her body naked, having been raped and stabbed to death in the woods of Washington Township.
Wow.
Today, Washington Township is pretty well developed, so it's hard to imagine. But back in 1976, there was nothing but, it was like a jungle back there. You wouldn't find a body there, but it happened to be that at some point they found a body of a young 20-year-old girl raped and murdered and stabbed, and they called the police, the people who found it. Police went, identified that this was the girl who had been missing. Her car had been found in the Paramus Park Mall, and they actually stopped. They were looking for clues. They were clueless. They had nothing. No. They stopped 1,000 people, drivers, as they were going by and said, "Listen, we found this person's body. Do you have anything that you can report?" They would stop people randomly.
Just going by at time because they figured that was their path of travel. Maybe they saw something.
Maybe they saw something on their way to work or whatever. They had no clues. Now the case was, couldn't proceed. I was a resident at the time, and I got a phone call. And I think it was from the reception desk at the lobby at the hospital, and they said, "There's 2 policemen here to see you." And my heart was beating.
Something you always want to hear.
Yeah. I said, "What did I do wrong?"
Yeah.
And I went downstairs, and these very smartly dressed, tall, very handsome young police officers were very respectful, and they said they were sent to me by Dr. Denson. Now, if you go back to the last episode, Dr. Denson, the medical examiner, has become my friend.
Right.
And the police officers explained. I took them into an office and said, in the hospital, and they said, "Look, we have this murder. Do you know anything about it?" And I said, I only know what I read in the papers and what I saw on TV. And they said, "We have no clues. We don't know what to do. And the community, everybody wants this murder solved. We want to solve this murder." And so they said, "Would you be able to hypnotize a witness?" And I said, "Sure. What does the witness say?" And they said they found I think he was 20 years old. Everybody seemed to be at that time. I was in my 20s. Yeah. The girl who got murdered, unfortunately, she was 20. The murderer, we found out later, was 16. He was underage.
Yeah.
And the witness was, I think, 20 or so. And they said that he was in Paramus Park Mall, and he may have seen something suspicious in the mall, but now this has been going on for quite some time since the actual murder, but the photograph of the...
So we're, months since the murder, or
I
weeks?
don't remember the exact time, but he said, "I saw the photograph of the girl that they flashed on TV, and I said to myself, that face is familiar." And he said, "It kept haunting me that I've seen this girl." And the police would say, "If you know anything about this girl, if you've seen anything, this is in Paramus Park Mall on such and such a day, please call us." So he says, I did see something, but I don't remember for the life of me.
Yeah.
And the police said, "Look, we have no other clues. This is the only thing we have.
This is all we've got. What can you make of it?"
What can you make of it? So Dr. Denson said, "You can do magic. Can you help us?" I said, "Listen, I've never used hypnosis for anything like this before. I've done medical cases, but nothing like this, but I'm willing to give it a shot."
Right.
And they said, "Doctor, we'd be most grateful." So I took this person into my office. If I remember, his name was Chris. And I said, "Chris, what do you remember?" And he said, "Nothing." He says, "I just remember that I had gone to Paramus Park Mall, and I think I saw this girl. The face is familiar, but I remember nothing else." Now, the purpose of these memoirs of a psychiatrist is not only to say all these fanciful things, but to say, and this is the part that's what I want to get across to our listeners, is how the mind registers things, but you don't remember it consciously. Right? The mind, as we saw with the treatment of the asthma patients, the ulcerative colitis, and so on, has a deep reservoir where a lot is stored that you're not aware of consciously.
It takes in a lot of stimulus.
It's like your computer.
Yeah.
When you look at the computer screen, you say, "Oh, what's in it?"
Yeah.
But when you go in deeper, it has tons and tons and tons of stuff stored in there. So
because you need to be selective about the stimulus you pay attention to.
That's right.
Correct?
So the mind basically says this is not important, but it doesn't. It's not junk. It's not trash. There's no place for it to be just thrown away.
This is why, and everyone's experienced this. I'm guessing this is why when someone sees a car that they've never seen before, and then for weeks afterwards, that's all they see.
Yes.
Because it's become part of what the mind's looking for.
Right.
It's been there all along.
That's right. They just never thought of it.
Yeah.
Correct. So Chris said to me, he says, I don't remember. Now, what comes out after hypnosis is fascinating, how much and what detail he remembered. And as you'll see in future murder cases that I got involved in, and just to give you a little bit of a jump forward,
Yeah.
from this successful hypnosis, we solved a lot of other murders. The police, the prosecutor's offices from various counties and states would come to me, and the CIA, FBI, cases, Secret Service. We solved a lot. The Exxon murder went to. Do you know about the Exxon
No.
murder? We'll talk about that
Yeah.
sometime.
Yep.
And then I went to Lincoln Center because somebody had gone there to see a show, and then during the show, during intermission, our body was found in the elevator shaft.
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
so, we had to hypnotize a lot of the people who had gone to the Lincoln Center, and we found the perpetrator. So we were talking about Chris. Chris said, I saw her face. Face is familiar, but I can't pinpoint anything I
Right.
remember. So I said, would you be willing to be hypnotized? I got his permission. Things were different then. You didn't need anything in writing or
Right.
whatever. So
Yeah.
I hypnotized him. It was
This
maybe,
is in your office.
well, I didn't have an office. I was a
Well-
resident. This was somewhere in the hospital.
Somewhere
some
in the
room
hospital. Not a police
No,
interrogation room or anything like that. Yeah.
No, somewhere in the hospital.
Yeah.
So I hypnotized him, and under hypnosis, he was like a grade 2 to 3, not the most hypnotizable, but he now started talking to me. I started saying, tell
2
me.
to 3 of 5, and you've mentioned
Out
this
of 5,
grade a
yeah.
couple of times.
Yes.
The grade goes what, 0 to 5 or 1?
0 is where they're not hypnotizable at all. 5 is like they're extremely hypnotizable.
I want to
He's
talk
like,
about this at some point too. That fascinates me. But
He's
yeah,
like midway.
Yep.
So I hypnotize him, and under hypnosis, he says he's at the Paramus Park Mall. He remembers the date. I tell him the date because the police had told me when she'd gone there. And under hypnosis, he said his prized possession at the time was a Volkswagen Beetle.
Okay. Yeah.
An old, at that time, those were very popular
Yeah.
cars and affordable for young kids like him
Yes.
and me. So he bought this Volkswagen Beetle. He shined it up, waxed it, polished it. It looked like a jewel, he said. And this was a summer day, and he'd gone and he'd parked it in the mall, away from all the cars. And he says, oh my God, it looks so beautiful. He says, I'm sure somebody's going to want to steal it. How these things have a way of working out. It's like, it's hard to explain how something like this happens, but it does. He says, I think somebody's going to want to steal that car. It's the most beautiful car in this parking lot.
Yeah.
And so he says, he walks from the car, continues to glance back at it to look how beautiful it looks, goes towards the thing. He says, he look around to see, are there any suspicious looking characters? What are the chances of this
So
happening,
funny.
Lou?
Yeah.
He says, are there any suspicious looking characters looking for a beautiful looking car to steal?
Right. And are any car thieves in the parking lot?
Are there any car thieves? So he's looking, and he's looking around. He says, I don't see, and this is exactly how he told it to me. What are the chances of this
he's
happening?
telling you the story in his mind as it's happening.
As it's happening,
Yeah.
because under hypnosis, he's saying all this.
He's
he
in
did
that
not
place,
remember
yeah.
that consciously. And he's actually living it. He says,
Yep.
I'm looking around the parking lot. There's nobody there. He says, oh, no, my car's okay. He says, I won't take too long inside this new mall. I'm going to go out and get into my car and drive back home in my beautiful car. As he's scanning this parking lot, he sees Kim somewhere. And he says, is she going to rob my car? So he makes a mental note of her face.
Yep.
That's how he remembered it. And that's why it was there somewhere when he said, I think this face. And he says,
Yep.
is she going to steal my face? It doesn't look like a car thief.
Right.
Continues to scan, and he says, wait, how did I miss this guy? He's in this suspicious looking guy sitting in a car in the parking lot. And he's looking at me.
Oh.
Now, as it turned out, that turned out to be the murderer
Yeah.
in the car, and he was going forward a little bit so the viewers understand. This 16-year-old boy had recently been arrested for a rape and had been incarcerated and put in an institution for adolescents because he couldn't be tried as an adult at the time.
Prior to being 16 years old.
Prior to being
Wow.
16 years
Yeah.
old, he
was
already
convicted of rape.
convicted of rape and put in whatever they put adolescents in, and had just been released like the day before or the day off this murder.
Wow.
And he said to the police that he couldn't wait to get out so he could rape again.
Yeah.
But this time didn't want to be arrested.
Right.
So
Well, he wanted to avoid that.
He
if
wanted to
possible.
avoid that,
Yeah.
so he wanted. This time he said, "I'm going to murder the victim, so that she doesn't. I don't get caught." And had it not been for,
I imagine the previous victim testified against him. And
I don't know
Yeah,
the details of that.
yeah.
And had it not been for this Chris, he would never have been caught. So Chris looks at him, and this murderer is in the car looking for a victim
Right.
who he saw in Kim as she's walking out the door,
Right.
and also looking to see if there are any witnesses,
Right.
because he doesn't want to be seen.
He's casing the joint.
He's casing the joint. So
Yeah.
he looks at Chris. Chris looks at him. They both make eye contact. Chris says, suspicious looking character. Looks like the guy who'd robbed my car.
Right.
He says, but I got your number, literally. He says, I got your number. I see you sitting there looking suspicious.
Yep.
And if my car is missing when I come out, I will have your license plate number to give to the police.
He noted the license plate.
So he looked at the license plate number of this murderer.
And he did all this relatively subconsciously. He doesn't remember doing it.
He doesn't remember at all
Yeah.
consciously, because he said, I made a mental note of it. I looked at the license plate number. I memorized it so that if by the time I come back, the car's missing, my beautiful Volkswagen, waxed and polished,
Yep.
gleaming in the sun, is missing. This is the guy that I'm going to go after. I'll tell the police this license plate number.
Right.
Goes into the mall, comes out, his car's sitting there. He completely, as all of us do, we say we're going to do something, he completely forgets about, doesn't remember consciously this murderer or the suspect or his license plate or the face of Kim. Gets into his car. Now his mind is shifted to the present. He
Puts all
drives off.
that information into storage.
At some point, he sees the photograph of Kim on the TV, says, hey, I remember something about this, but I don't remember anything. Now it comes out. So I asked him, I said, so you did look at the license plate number? He says, I did. He said, I made a mental note of it. I have made it mental note of. I said, tell me it. I don't remember the license plate number that he gave me at the time, but he repeated it. I gave it to the police that afternoon. It was sometime mid-afternoon that I gave it to them. The police officers, by the way, subsequently became very good friends of mine.
I can imagine.
Yeah, they came to me, they brought their families to me, and we went out together, and we solved other cases since that time. But the guy's name was Mark, if I remember correctly. Mark then, and he was just a few years older than I was. He was like in his late 20s or early 30s. He called me that evening on my home phone, and he said, we got him. He says, the license plate number that you gave us, that Chris gave you, was accurate, except that just like, in Toys R Us, they reversed the R.
Oh, yeah.
Either it was a J or an L that he had converted.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
He later explained to us that he had a learning disability.
Oh.
So he took things and he...
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, but they punched it into the computer, and since out of 7 numbers, 6 were accurate, they were able to pick up the license plate number. They traced it back to this person who was the murderer. They recognized that he had just been released from some kind of a facility for adolescents for a prior rape. They knew they had him. They had his address. They went to his address. They knocked on, this is what they told me later, they knocked on the door. He was shocked to see them. He was a big, burly guy, and confessed to the murder, said everything, gave the details. He had like cowboy boots. He had a hunting knife that he had purchased. They went to the store. They identified that he had, in fact, bought the knife there.
Yep.
They found the weapon, they identified as the murder weapon, and they arrested him, and he's been in jail for now almost 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was the first murder that was successfully solved with the use of hypnosis.
All right. So, as sitting here as a layperson, I'm thinking about you pulling memories out of someone through hypnosis, and there are going to be people who are going to say, well, how do we know? I mean, this all came together because it all... the license plate linked to the person was pretty easily made as the perpetrator here. But how do people react to hypnosis as a tool for testimony admissible in court?
You have the best questions, Lou. Every time you ask this actually, in a subsequent episode, future episode, a session, I will talk about how it was actually used as a defense against one of the people that was the murderer. This murderer confessed to what he did.
Yep.
He didn't deny it. He said, his defense was, he said, oh, let me go back a little bit. What I didn't describe is what exactly happened. So he actually, this murderer was waiting in the car, in his car. He saw Chris. He looked at him, wondering why Chris is looking at him.
Right.
Then saw Kim, went up to Kim with his knife in his hand, and took her to the wooded lot in Washington Township. I don't know if he drove his own car or he drove Kim's car. Raped her there, murdered her, drove the car back, either his car or must have been Kim's car.
Yep.
Drove it back to the parking lot, parked it there, and then went home. So his defense attorney, from what I found out later, said that it was actually consensual. That
yeah.
he took Kim with him, and Kim consented to it. Then, in a fit of passion, she became enraged, took out his knife, and started attacking him. So, in self-defense, he killed her.
Yeah.
But I think the judge or the jury didn't buy that, and
Right.
he was convicted. So, because of that, there wasn't much of a defense on his case.
Right.
But in a subsequent murder that we'll talk about, the murderer was an extremely affluent, extremely wealthy, very politically powerful man who murdered his wife. And he hired the same attorneys that defended Oliver North. If everybody knows who
Yeah.
Oliver North is,
Sure.
and what that so it was a very powerful team, defense team. And the only thing that was helping to convict him was the testimony of a neighbor who had seen the murderer come back to his house. The neighbor had described something, and he didn't remember. Just like in this case, the neighbor didn't remember what he saw.
Right.
But he did remember that he saw the murderer come back to his house at a certain time when the murderer said he's in his office.
Yeah.
And the police had believed him.
So this undermines the alibi.
So it undermines the alibi,
Yeah.
and under hypnosis, he said that. Now, that was one of the main things under which the whole case revolved. And this man's attorney, Oliver North's attorney, said that the hypnosis may have put this into the guy's mind.
That would be my play.
Yeah.
If I'm the
and
attorney.
he said, how do I know that this hypnotist didn't put it in his mind that he saw him come back?
Right.
And so the case was actually thrown out the first time.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecutor's office, though, went back and they produced videotapes of me hypnotizing this witness. And the case was retried, and then this man was sentenced to life, I
Right.
think, for the murder of his wife. So you're right. The public that I've spoken to about it, nobody seems to have a problem with it.
Right.
As long as the end justifies the means, as
Right.
long as you get the murderer and you can prove that this guy was the murderer, which we were able to prove in all of these cases, because it's in the newspapers, it's in the law journals. And I just want to say one thing about that when we finish this sentence. The people didn't have a problem. The only people that had a problem with it was the attorneys defending the
Yes.
murderers, who would try to say it's not possible.
Oh, I
That
would
kind-
push that. Sure. If I'm an
Yeah.
attorney, I would push that pretty strongly.
Correct.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah, so by the way, what I wanted to say is, some of this might be a little hard to believe because people are not used to saying that the mind can do all this. Memories from God knows how long. Like there were some cases where a mafia hitman came back many years later with some confessions. And I had to hypnotize him to come back with some memories and stuff. And he didn't remember a lot, but under hypnosis he did.
Sure.
And he was able to tell us a lot of
Well,
things.
we all have memory issues.
Yeah, so under
But what
hypnosis-
happened in our 20s, 40, 50 years ago is still there.
Still there.
We can't access it as readily as we could in the past, but with hypnosis, we probably can.
That's right.
Yeah.
So people may find it hard to believe, and all I say is, you can look in the newspapers from clippings, as I think you're going to put some on the thing, and you can also look in law journals. The law journals have actual descriptions of these cases, and when the defense lawyer and the prosecutor are fighting it out, everything is transcribed and it's on the law journal, so people can actually visit and see that. So that's the first case that I used hypnosis on, and there's many, many more. I hope you all like this. Loop, I hope you like it too.
Let me ask you before we let you go, though, because this is fascinating stuff. I want to know your feelings about this and being a part of this and helping to bring this killer to justice. And I want to know how you felt about, well, obviously you knew hypnosis. How did you feel about the testimony you were getting while you were getting it out of the witness in this case?
This was new to me.
Yeah.
First time. First time in this case, I just like with the patient that I was hypnotizing who was supposed to die, and I hypnotized him and his breathing started coming back, and part of me was disbelieving.
Right.
I don't believe this. I mean, I'm a physician. I'm a person that did hypnosis, but I've never seen this before.
Right.
In our first or second session, I talk about somebody that I did age regression. How many people are going to believe that she went back to a previous life? I didn't believe it as I'm doing it myself. I said, this is not possible. But I know when I saw it, when I was 19 or 20 years old, when I saw Max Colley doing hypnosis on my two friends on the stage, doing things that I couldn't believe. A guy that couldn't do 2 push-ups was levitated between 2 chairs, and there's 3 men standing. I couldn't believe it.
Stuff.
So as
your
an
asthmatic patient, you're not believing it, but you're watching the results.
I'm watching the results.
His levels are coming down, his breathing is getting deeper and more effective.
Right.
In this case, with the witness, he got a license plate, and it led to this somewhat obvious criminal.
Well, the license plate, I didn't know at the time whether it was accurate or not, so I don't know.
No, but in the end, you saw it work out.
Here I am, the guy saying to me, I don't remember anything other than, I think I saw this Kim's face. And under hypnosis, gives me a complete story of, I'm looking at this guy, he's looking at me, I'm looking at my car, I can see it. And you'll see in further, as I get better at this, you'll see that my skills in getting information out of these are getting better.
Right.
And I use these for better results.
Yeah, but this was your first time doing it.
Yes. So to answer your question, I was shocked, but I was also very excited because obviously, you want to get some justice done, and want to catch the perpetrator, and to me that was my satisfaction.
And outside of this testimony, they had nothing.
They had
absolutely nothing.
The case was cold.
Yeah.
And by the way, I never got any position with the police, because the police said, look, if we do something where it looks like you're getting something out of it, it can be said that you were doing it for some gain.
Right.
So I did it as a pure community service. There was nothing ever given to me.
If you don't produce useful testimony, you're no longer useful.
That's right.
They wanted to avoid that appearance of motivation.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
All right. What's next for us?
Well, next time I think what depends on a lot on what our audience likes. And, if they can write, I think last time you were saying that they can put in some comments on the website. That, depending on what people are interested in, we can take this further. I have a lot more cases of both medical issues and conditions that I treated. If they're interested in that, if people are interested in more of these crimes that I hypnotized, we can talk about that. We can talk about this case where the Oliver North's defendant attorneys defended this man. That was an interesting case. There's a lot that we can talk about.
All right. And we'll see you next time. If people want to see past episodes of Memoirs of a Psychiatrist, or even future episodes, depending on when you're watching this, if you're catching up, go to Memoirs of a Psychiatrist on Facebook page. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you'd like to hear.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.